Hello, I'm Matthew Rhodes from the George C. Marshall Center in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. For the next several minutes, I'll be talking about the concept resilience. I'll talk a little bit about the meanings of the term, how it has become related to security, and ways that the NATO alliance has adopted it as a core task. Like a lot of words, it has evolved over time. The original, most concrete meaning of the term is as a physical quality of bouncing back or returning to an original shape. A good example of this is the way that the cushion of a sofa gives way under the weight of a person or a pet who might sit on it, but then bounces back to take its original form when that person gets up. Now, starting in about the middle of the 20th century, it was also applied increasingly to personal resilience, the ability of an individual to cope with severe stress, such as a serious illness or the death of a close friend or family member. And then most recently, especially since the 1990s, it's also become a term in discussions of security and public safety, the ability of countries and communities to bounce back from things like natural disasters or terrorist attacks. So this is all now part of our security discussion. One of the people who has thought most seriously about resilience in the security context is the Czech security expert Jiří Šedivý. Jiří Šedivý is one of our former colleagues here at the Marshall Center who has gone on to serve in a number of senior positions, including as a NATO Assistant Secretary General, the Czech Republic's ambassador to NATO, and now as the Chief Executive of the European Defense Agency. In Šedivý's framework, there are really three elements to keep in mind in talking about resilience as a security matter. The first is this ability to absorb the original shock or blow from an attack, from a storm, from something of this nature. The second is the ability then to recover and restore the pre-crisis normal conditions that we're applying. And third, and no less important, is the ability to adapt, to learn lessons from the experience and make changes to become less vulnerable in the future. Now, it's really in this sense of resilience then that NATO formally embraced resilience, especially at its Warsaw Summit in the summer of 2016. In fact, at that meeting in Warsaw, there were three separate documents that really highlighted the way that NATO is now looking at resilience. The first was the summit's formal declaration itself, which flagged resilience as now a core aspect of collective defense. There was also a second statement on a commitment to enhancing resilience, in which allies talked about ways that they would collectively work to make themselves more resilient. And then last but not least, at the same summit, there was the signing of a joint declaration with the European Union on enhancing strategic partnership between the organizations. And again, resilience was emphasized in the text. And working with the EU in this area seemed especially natural. Not only are 20 members of the two organizations the same countries, but the EU itself had adopted a document, a global strategy, just a few weeks before that mentioned the importance of resilience on more than 40 occasions. Also, as part of the Warsaw Summit, NATO leaders identified what they called baseline requirements. Now, the requirements recognize, again, that resilience is primarily a national responsibility, but it identified some standards and requirements in these 7 key areas, everything from the security of energy supplies to communication systems and transportation. Now, this year, with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've again been reminded of the potential importance of resilience. This involves both the immediate aspects of the pandemic's effect on public health and the way that NATO has tried to respond by things like coordinating the airlift of emergency humanitarian supplies and now hoping to create a stockpile of key medical equipment. The second way it has really affected NATO is the focus on disinformation and the way that NATO can help nations identify and respond to efforts by outside powers to use pandemics as a way of sowing confusion and fear in society. Now, to wrap up, we should recognize that not everyone thinks this new focus on resilience is a great idea. There are critics who say on the one hand that the term is too broad, that it makes security issues out of what should be normal civilian functions. On the other hand, there are critics who think that the term is potentially misguided because it could divert attention and resources from more proactive ways to prevent problems and threats in the first place. So while I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge such criticisms and to try to address them, the unpredictability of security threats that we face in the 21st century means that we're likely to be talking about resilience for a long time to come, and that NATO and our governments will be working to implement it and keep us safer in the process. Thank you for your attention.
Hello everyone, I'm Biljana Popovska from the Marshall Center, North Macedonia. In this video, under the general topic of global health, I will talk about resilience as a core test for NATO. To begin, I would say a few words about the Southeast Europe first response to the COVID pandemic. As in many places, reports of a new respiratory illness in China at first drew only passing interest in Southeast Europe. As late as February 26, 2020, a televised appearance by Serbian President health experts with President Aleksandar Vučić featured light-hearted talk about shopping in Italy and drinking alcohol to avoid infection. Meanwhile, a Croatian man returning from Milan became the region's first confirmed coronavirus case on February 25th, with others in Greece, North Macedonia, and Romania the next day. Neighboring countries followed until Montenegro became Europe's last state to report an infection on March 17. Well, gaps in reports and testing leave the true scale of the virus spread likely even larger. So it all started like not taking maybe very seriously, like with jokes and things like that. But now something about the NATO core values, which lead to how NATO responded to COVID pandemic. Each NATO member country needs to be resilient and recover from a major shock, such as natural disaster, failure of critical infrastructure, or a hybrid or armed attack. Resilience is a society's ability to resist and recover easily and quickly from such shocks and combines both civil preparedness and military capacity. Robust resilience through civil preparedness in allied countries is essential to NATO's collective security and defense. The principle of resilience is firmly anchored in Article 3 of the Alliance Founding Treaty. In order more effectively to achieve the objectives of this treaty, the parties separately and jointly, by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. The individual commitment of each ally to maintain and strengthen its resilience reduces the vulnerability of NATO as a whole. Members can strengthen resilience through the development of home defense and niche skills, such as cyber defense or medical support, combining civilian, economic, commercial, and military factors. When allies are well prepared, they are less vulnerable or less likely to be attacked, making NATO as a whole stronger. NATO has taken swift and robust action to limit the spread of the virus, to reduce the risks for its soldiers and civilians and to communities they serve. Here, we should not forget NATO's core task to maintain deterrence and defense for its nations. In addition, NATO's ability to conduct operations has not been undermined. NATO has contributed significantly with strategic airlift capabilities, field hospitals, protective equipment, medical capabilities, and Euro-Atlantic response coordination support. At NATO Defense Ministerial, June 2020, NATO has agreed a new plan, new stockpile of medical equipment, a new fund for quick acquisition of medical supplies. Many allies have already offered to donate to the stockpile and contribute to the fund, sign of alliance unity and solidarity. The corona proved that risks are too great for any nation to face alone. By standing together, supporting each other, working with partners in EU, United Nations, and World Health Organization, NATO and we all shall overcome despite the obvious attempts to China and Russia to downgrade NATO's efforts, resorting to mass diplomacy. Of course, in conjunction of fake news and propaganda, because NATO solidarity is real and consistent. The aid NATO provided was most needed and substantial. This brings us to point out the role of the civilian preparedness in support of military operations. When military forces need to deploy, they rely on the civilian and commercial sectors for support. In concrete terms, this means that they need support to deploy rapidly and freely across alliance territory. Military forces are reliant, for instance, on civilian transport, facilities, satellite communication, and power supplies, not to mention food and water supplies, to conduct their operations. The range of functions and facilities the civilian sector covers is broad and includes continuity of government, essential services to the population, and support to military operations as the three critical civilian functions that a country must be able to uphold under all circumstances. And exercises are an effective way to conduct stress tests of national arrangements, in particular when it comes to large-scale problems such as an attack with weapons of mass destruction or dealing with hybrid warfare. NATO and EU complement each other. Hence, I would say something about the response of the EU to the COVID-19 crisis. As George Marshall Center for Advanced Security Studies alumni, I cannot resist to mention that George Marshall advocated significant US economic and political commitment for post-war European recovery plan that saved millions of Europeans from starvation and Soviet domination to face the consequences of the post-war period. There might be a need nowadays for a new Marshall Plan, and indeed, this is in the heart of the German presidency of the Council of the EU. No region in the world has shown so much solidarity as we have now in Europe. Therefore, it's important to further strengthen the spirit of solidarity. The virus knows no borders. There is a need European virtues to manage the crisis: solidarity, willingness to compromise, pragmatism, and international cooperation. And they are all indeed in the focus of the German presidency motto, Together for Europe's Recovery. Historic agreement on EU budget and the Recovery Fund Next Generation Europe at the European Council in July achieved already solid foundation for a new Marshall Plan. To demonstrate joint capacity to offer tangible support, especially for the immediate neighbors, especially to fight coronavirus in Western Balkan and abroad. This is actually what are these funds for. For helping to mitigate the effects of coronavirus, EU mobilized 8 measures for the volume of 33.3 billion euro, and Germany additionally 5 million furthered the project of another 10 million on the pipeline. In addition, after the much overdue decision on opening accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania in March at the EU Web Summit in May, EU wants to maintain the positive dynamic in Southeastern Europe for further progress during German presidency. Main focus is on finalizing the negotiation frameworks for North Macedonia and Albania. Germany and North Macedonia in line with this, shared the ambitious aim of holding the first accession conference still during the German presidency. Once government in Republic of North Macedonia is in place to resume pushing the reforms path, especially in the priority areas such as justice, fight against corruption and organized crime, security and secret service reform, and public administration reform. Use new accession methods, puts even greater focus on lasting reforms in these key sectors. Also in Macedonia and Albania, work to agree on the negotiating frameworks. Once it is achieved, the first intergovernment conference can be set. But all member states have to agree on the negotiated framework. There should be no room for bilateral issues in the negotiating framework because a great deal is at stake. The peace, reconciliation, stability, not only in the region, but Europe as a whole. Western Balkan is a fertile arena, is a doorstep to Europe, is an arena that attracts the interest of other players. To raise the Europe profile in the region, therefore, it's very important. Western Balkans is part of Europe and must not allow the other actors to come to play. In EU, it is all about democracy, rule of law, freedom, life's prosperity, and regional reconciliation. It is these values that make so unique Europe, and it is these values that the new aspiring countries should adhere to and aspire to. Another issue for NATO, in addition to EU, is fighting and it is in line with this, is fighting fake news and disinformation. NATO views fact-based, credible communication and the best way of countering disinformation. And this is based on the alliance's core values: democracy, freedom of speech, and the rule of law. Engaging the public and building resilience is the best way to immunize people against the disinformation. And NATO will continue to fight the disinformation. Now, something about looking ahead in the Southeast Europe. The dramatic developments of March through April represent just the start of a longer-term challenge that may bring or accelerate transformative change. As the region of Southeast Europe and its partners move beyond immediate crisis reaction, focus will be directed to collaborative steps that maximize opportunity for comprehensive recovery. Hence, the need for rapid, sometimes drastic measures to control the virus should not negate commitment to democratic principles. While the coronavirus pandemic has reopened debates over national self-reliance and global interdependence, the types of modest multilateralism embodied by NATO in the EU may prove even more essential through the crisis' next phase. The states of Southeast Europe can also prove themselves an active, equal partners through complementary regional cooperation, through frameworks such as the Crisis Initiative that can facilitate redevelopment of production and transportation networks. Finally, COVID-19 provides another reminder of the importance of strengthened strategic communication. Governments as well as EU and NATO bodies must present public with clear, reliable, resonant information concerning key health issues and policy responses. Broader understanding of both will counter further spread of the coronavirus as well as related disinformation. With this, I finish my presentation and I thank you for your attention.